Making a video about Yume Nikki is an extremely daunting task. We're talking about a game that not only has a legendary status amongst indie fans, but also one that means a lot to me. Even if you didn't play it yourself, you've probably at least heard of it. It's a game that left a mark on both the RPG Maker community and the entire indie scene at the time. For years, it practically served as the poster child for the entire genre, and it inspired so many artists out there. Whether it's a spiritual successor, something loosely inspired by, or even stuff completely outside of its niche, you can feel Yume Nikki's influence permeating a lot of people's work. And I know it's technically not the first indie horror RPG. There was the extremely underrated Kinder by Parun just before that. But I can't downplay Yume Nikki's impact. To this day, it's still one of the most well-known titles to ever come from RPG Maker. And yet, despite my absolute love for the game, the thought of making a video about it kinda sat in the back of my brain for a few months. I have this pretty bad habit of intentionally delaying future videos, not by lack of interest, but because I get nervous. I'm still relatively new to this whole YouTube creative process, so when ideas don't instantly lead me to writing 4,000 words in a sitting, they tend to be put aside rather quickly. Sometimes they end up on the back burner for months, solely because it's hard to gather my thoughts, to talk about games that mean a lot to me, you know, on a more personal level. There's always this weird feeling of anxiety, like a small voice in the back of my head's telling me, what if it's been talked to death already? What if my work doesn't convey my feelings well enough? And I know it's mostly me just projecting my insecurities, but for some reason, my desire to talk about Yume Nikki, this game that influenced me greatly, never really left. In some way, I'd like to believe that maybe it's not too late to share my passion with the world, to explain why I care so much about an old game with no dialogue in it, to talk about how it shaped me as a person. There's gotta be a reason why I keep name dropping it every 2 videos, right? So today, let's talk about Yume Nikki. My thoughts about the experience, what it meant to me growing up, and its overall impact. It's not exactly the usual review format, but we'll have to make do. In case you've been living under a rock for the past 18 years, Yume Nikki is a freeware game made in RPG Maker 2003. Its creator, a Japanese game developer only known as Kikiyama, describes it as an exploration game with a dark atmosphere. You play as Madatsuki, a socially withdrawn girl who only gets to escape from the confines of her room when she's dreaming. Released in 2004, Yume Nikki's first public build was an incomplete preview of the game. It did get a couple of updates throughout the years, culminating into a nearly complete version in 2007. But despite its eventual Steam release, the game's considered forever unfinished due to the long period of time between updates. Yume Nikki gained a lot of its traction through the Japanese forum board 2chan, but it wouldn't really gain a cult following in the West until the release of an unofficial English patch. I personally found out about Yume Nikki through a certain Mongolian spearfishing forum that I probably shouldn't have been on at that age. At the time, it felt like there was nothing else like it, a game with no exact goal, just this open space for you to explore. To give you a bit of perspective, at the time of its release, I was a Nintendo kid through and through. I didn't even know LSD Dream Emulator existed yet. So the idea of exploring one's dreams really resonated with me, with how novel of a concept it was. Being able to explore this endless world felt almost magical. The idea of being thrown into a gigantic sandbox and being told, have at it, always struck a chord in me. After years of playing through games that gently nudged me from destination to destination, it felt refreshing to discover things on my own. In contrast to the game's open-ended nature, the room you start in, Madatsuki's room, feels small. It has this almost claustrophobic feel to it. You're stuck in there with barely anything to do. There's a Famicom you can play on. It has this cute little mini-game where you have to catch eggplants with your mouth. You could go spend some time on your balcony, not that there's much to do there, or maybe save your progress at the diary on your desk. The title Yume Nikki translates from Japanese to Dream Diary, so it kinda makes sense for you to save there. After all, a diary kinda serves as a recollection of your memories, so it's a nice take on the usual save system. If you ever try to leave your room though, Madatsuki will refuse and just shake her head. There's something out there she clearly doesn't want to confront. Oh my god, she's just like me for real. It's only when you go to bed that you're introduced to the game's greater world. You wake up on the balcony, but this time the outside scenery is different. This droning, ominous feeling music is playing as you head back inside. Your room is still there, but a couple of things have changed. You can't save at the desk anymore, your console's gone, and whenever you interact with the television, you're met with this cryptic eye. Fun fact, that's actually one of the inspirations behind my channel's icon. The main change you'll notice here is that you can actually leave through the front door this time. And once you do so, you'll be met with the Nexus, this large room filled with different colored doors. This is where the game truly opens up to you. Each door will lead you to a different dream world, some more tame than others. I remember as a kid having such a hard time navigating through them. I thought the maps would go on forever. Don't get me wrong, some of these areas are still pretty big, but it's mostly due to a clever programming trick. Whenever you find yourself at the edge of a map, you're moved to the opposite edge seamlessly. That way it creates the illusion that you've been walking forever. In addition to the already available dream worlds, each zone can lead you to several smaller ones, most of which are interconnected. I'm sorry in advance with how confusing it's gonna sound, but here's an example. Let's say you want to get to the White Desert. First you need to start in the Graffiti world. Head to the mall hidden there, then to Dense Woods B. Navigate to the Teleport Maze, which leads you to Wilderness FC. If you continue on, you'll eventually end up in FC World A, then FC Dungeon, ultimately resulting in White Desert B and A respectively. Or, you know, you could take the easier route and start in the Block World, which leads directly to White Desert A. But anyway, it doesn't matter. It sounds almost nonsensical when presented like this, but I've always loved how Yume Nikki's areas can be reached in many different ways. It made the entire world feel connected, and it really benefited the game's core value, which is exploration. Yume Nikki is one of those games that gain a lot from its lack of clear instructions. You're incentivized to just look around and explore at your own pace. It's probably not for everyone, but to me, each new section of the game I'd stumble upon, some completely by accident, heightened the experience tremendously. Even though the game doesn't have an exact plot to follow, and kinda leaves everything up to your interpretation, it does have some form of main goal. Hidden deep throughout each world are 24 effects, items you can obtain by interacting with certain objects or NPCs. While a lot of these effects are purely cosmetic, there are some that can help you throughout your journey. The main ones would be the bicycle for traversing dreams faster, the umbrella or the Yuki-onna to clear out fires, the knife for and Medamode. Sorry, eye palm according to the new translation. Side note real quick, but I kinda miss the old translation. That's something I noticed when replaying through the Steam version, but the effects that were Japanese references to ghosts or yokais got English names instead. It does absolutely nothing to change the experience, so it's not like a bad thing. It's mostly that I'm not used to seeing Snow Woman and Faceless Ghosts instead of Yuki-onna and Noperobo. But anyway, Medamode allows you to teleport back to the Nexus without having to wake up. Normally to return to the real world, you'd have to press the 9 key and have Madatsuki pinch yourself awake. It's usually reserved for when you're completely lost or if you got stuck in an inescapable room by a Tori Ningen. The Medamode effect circumvents the whole issue of having to go in and out of the dream world if you want to return to the Nexus. It's a real lifesaver when you're on the hunt for the last couple of effects. In general, I've always found effects to be a nice little reward to incentivize the player to explore. Cause to be honest with you, some of them are tucked away in really weird spots that I probably wouldn't have guessed without having prior knowledge. I've found that most games that use dreams as a setting tend to fall in either of those two categories. Whimsical joyful wonderland and horrifying eldritch nightmare. Sometimes both, but that's mostly just Kirby games. Yume Nikki kinda falls in between, and that speaks a lot to the game's dreamlike quality. Dreams are basically this jumbled up mess of your most recent feelings, thoughts, and experiences. So most of the time, they don't fall clearly in either category. Sometimes normal dreams can feel uncanny. Sometimes the nightmarish hellscapes aren't a cause for concern. It's never entirely black or white. Except that one. A lot of the zones you can find in Yume Nikki give off this uncanny feeling, despite never really being in danger. I think one of my favorite examples is the mall area. You can find its entrance in the Graffiti world, just there, smack dab in the middle of nowhere. There's something ominous to it. To make matters worse, when you make your way in, you're met with these strange faceless people wandering around. Every time I found myself there, I tried my best to avoid them. There is nothing inherently dangerous or threatening about them, but just their presence in this seemingly empty place was enough to unnerve me. That's something I don't talk about a lot. Malls are kind of a surreal place to be in, at least when nobody else is in there with you. Our brains usually associate shopping malls with daylight, plenty of people, loud sounds. Jason! A lot of horror games tend to subvert those expectations by making empty mall levels where the only sound you hear are your footsteps. Silent Hill 3 and Hypnagogia Boundless Dreams instantly come to mind. Another place I absolutely love despite its general creepiness is the wooded area leading up to the stoplight effect. You have to walk on this dark road where a row of creatures are just floating ominously above you. Later on, when you eventually backtrack to that same area, you'll notice only one of them is left, and for a split second you can catch it looking directly at you when you exit the screen. That's the stuff of actual nightmares. It's small details like that that I love so much. I can only speak for myself, but a lot of the nightmares I have aren't traditionally scary stuff, like getting chased by a killer or falling off a high building. They tend to be filled with abstract imagery strewn all across the place. It usually doesn't make too much sense, and I feel like Yume Nikki nails that feeling perfectly. Why yes, I do get all the information I need from cryptic symbolism in my dreams. I turned out pretty alright. At least I think. The game's rapidly switching from pretty scary to oddly relaxing and tends to go back and forth between the two. Something that contributes heavily to both of these moods is the soundtrack. Each zone is accompanied with its own musical score, often unconventional rhythms looped over a couple of seconds. A lot of the places you'll visit have pretty relaxing music, yet they never feel right. They have this air of mystery to them. I always found myself having trouble talking about music, but if a 5 to 10 second loop can make me feel various emotions, that's definitely something worth highlighting. One of my favorite tracks comes from this pretty secluded area in the game, the one where you get the flute effect. It's gonna sound a bit silly now, but back when OSTs weren't readily available everywhere, I used to leave the game open on certain areas while I was doing other stuff like drawing. I know it's probably because of my memories associated to this song, but there's something melancholic about it. Even though there's nothing here indicating sadness, I can't help but feel like I'm sitting with an old friend. When I originally played through Yume Nikki, there wasn't a nicely compiled list of effects or locations available. You were lucky if there was one GameFAQs guide with instructions like walk to the right for 3 minutes then go up for a bit. So you could miss out on a lot of stuff. But what you did find was because you put in the time to explore. Comparing notes with friends about which effect or weird place I managed to find made the experience even more special to me. Obviously, I'm not going to tell you to suffer through hours of fine-combing each area in hopes that you didn't miss anything noteworthy. There's no shame in using a guide. As a matter of fact, I used one this time around, mostly for expediency and my hard drive's sake. Though I still maintain that going in blind made discovering every new thing the game had to offer 1,000 times more worth it. Stuff like this, for example. When exploring the dream world, you can find those weird occurrences that fans call events. Some events happen as a result of specific triggers, like Madatsuki interacting with a certain object or location, while others have a random chance to appear. The most famous one is easily Uboa. In a pretty secluded part of the game is the Pink Sea, this beautiful zone you can explore. Following and interacting with the balloons floating around will eventually lead you to this small house. An NPC named Poniko lives there, and if you turn off the lights in her house, there's a 1 out of 64 chance that she'll turn into this weird grotesque blob. If you interact with Uboa, its face will change and it will warp you to this strange looping world with only a bleeding figure in the distance. The only way you can escape from here is by either pinching yourself awake or using the Metamote effect. I know by virtue of the 1 out of 64 chances that it seems a bit silly to just go in and out of the house for another shot at the event, but I remember as a kid thinking that this was just a rumor, that my online friends were just pulling my leg until one day I made my way there and it happened on the first try. It generally felt like I had found some ancient secret treasure, and the best is that the game is filled with even more stuff like that. There's also this small corner of the map in the number world that has a chance to look different than usual. If you use your kitchen knife there, it will open the pathway to Kyukyu-kun. It's this weird jelly thing that's just rubbing the staircase railing. Nothing exactly odd, at least compared to the wild imagery we've seen so far, though it will start rubbing the handrail faster if you have the kitchen knife equipped, which is kinda weird of itself. Flashing lights warning for the next few seconds, but if you make your way past it, you can enter this door that leads you to a large face changing colors rapidly. The animation can't be skipped, and whenever it's done, Madatsuki just wakes up, back in her room. One of my favorite dream worlds, the White Desert, is also home to some of the weirder events, 2 of which require you to stab the innocent Dave Specter. That's an unofficial name, by the way, referring to the NPC's slight reference to the TV producer of the same name. If it was up to me though, I probably would have picked something different, because writing that down in the script was pretty awkward. The next 2 events were some of the only characters to actually get canon names. Despite her relatively tame appearance, Monoe gives off this really weird vibe. With how many unexplainable things we've seen so far, it's obviously the smiling schoolgirl that's a concern. On the flip side, Monoko looks normal initially, but if you approach her while using the stoplight effect, her body will contort itself and grow limbs. Fortunately, not every event is that level of nightmare fuel. Some of them are pretty tame in comparison, with stuff like waking up with a crick in the neck, or sometimes when you interact with your TV, you'll be met with a different channel than usual. I know I might sound a bit melodramatic about this, mostly because we're talking about a game that I've sunk a pretty large amount of time in, but I legit cannot put in words how fantastical it felt to discover all these things by myself, only assisted by basic internet word of mouth. Though nothing could have prepared me for the day I was told the game had an ending. Now seems like the right time to do a spoiler warning since we're gradually heading towards more serious topics. Even though I usually make a pretty big deal about experiencing games fully unspoiled, this time around I don't think knowing the game's ending tarnishes the experience in any way. Though I do know there are people out there that haven't played the game yet and would rather stay unspoiled, so here's a timestamp you can skip to just in case. Once you've collected all 24 effects and you're content with the exploration you've done, you can return to the Nexus to trigger the requirements for the game's ending. In this room, and only this one specifically, you can press the 5 key to drop currently equipped effects on the floor. Each of them takes the form of an egg with different properties to differentiate all of them. Once you're down to only the tutorial left in your inventory, you can return to the real world. On the surface, nothing has changed, but if you make your way to the balcony, you'll notice something that wasn't there before. If you walk over to the stepladder, Marutsuki will jump off the building and the credits will play out. This very melancholic song picks up as you see a single puddle of blood. When I originally played through Yume Nikki, this was the moment that stuck out to me the most, the one that left the biggest impact. All the wild imagery I was presented with earlier meant nothing because the game ended abruptly, just like this. Now that I'm older though, I realize that it's probably because I didn't have the proper knowledge associated to things like depression and suicide. At the time, I was a pretty sad kid who had gone through a lot already, and it just clicked with me. I didn't have to know what it meant to understand that's how I felt inside. Obviously I'm a little bit better today, at least enough to realize that I probably shouldn't have given this scene that much importance. While I agree that what it's trying to convey is unfortunately very relatable to many of us, there is so much more that Yume Nikki offers. I just feel like focusing exclusively on the ending kinda dilutes the rest of the experience. I remember spending a lot of time theorizing about what Yume Nikki's meaning was. Not just the ending, but the entire game's symbolism, its themes. Is Marutsuki really dead? Was this all just a dream within a dream? Who knows, but the mystery of it was enthralling. Yume Nikki offered a degree of storytelling I've yet to find in anything else. The game has no dialogue or any indication to tell you how to feel at any precise moment, and yet, at that time, that lack of certainty meant more than I could have known. I don't think it's easy to convey real, genuine emotions through video games, and that's coming from someone who cries a lot more than I'd like to admit. I've played through so much stuff already that intentionally harps up the orchestral music during a sad scene, almost telling you that now's the moment to feel sad. And in of itself, there's nothing wrong with setting the mood, but there was something entirely different in how Yume Nikki presented it. No music change, no sudden zooms to highlight important objects, just you and a reflection of what you think of those things. What I got from the game was elements that channel themes like isolation. Scenes like the Toriningen party, this event where 3 NPCs are celebrating not so far from you. You're there, but you can never reach them. Scenes like Marutsuki shaking her head at the door felt all too real with the isolation I felt at that time. Anxiety, the world is filled with elements you recognize, but they're placed in unconventional fashions. Eyes and arms sprouting from the ground, you're constantly met with some pretty uncomfortable imagery. Escapism, traveling through those dream worlds, hoping that something will be out there, maybe help you find some meaning in what you're doing, what you're experiencing. And identity, being unhappy with too many aspects of my own self and lashing out about it. Yume Nikki is a powerful game in a way that it approaches myriads of potential topics without making it explicitly clear. And you know, it's not like my takes are the only right ones. There's plenty more theories that were discussed throughout the years, like Uboa's significance, phallic imagery in the game, a lot more that I can't just stop the video to discuss. But if there's one thing that's for sure, is that the fandom was probably one of the most active one I've ever been in, just considering the sheer amount of theory crafting done on a daily basis. Every day there were more and more people coming forward with their own takes on the story and what it could all potentially mean. At least, that's how it was back when I was actively partaking in it. So around 2006 on various web boards, and then on Uboa-chan around 2009, maybe a bit after. I'm not so sure how active the fandom is nowadays, but they definitely contributed in making the experience as memorable as possible. I don't think Yume Nikki would have been this life-changing for me if I didn't have a place to share my thoughts with other like-minded people at the time. And obviously, I'm not saying you can't enjoy the game without the community's help. It would be unfair of me to go, oh, you just had to be there, because that's factually untrue. You can still play the game today and get something meaningful out of it. What started as a prototypical walking simulator set in a surreal dream world became the vessel for so many creative interpretations, and with those came in the desire for closure. Produced from May 2013 to March 2014, the Yume Nikki official manga has often been criticized by fans. It tried offering a canon explanation to the game's events and focused a lot more on other characters like Seko Masada Sensei and Poniko. Even though I'm not a huge fan of it, mostly because I value the ambiguity of the original material the manga was based on, I can at least see some great value in its existence. The art is just beautiful. I remember a lot of people hating on it when it originally released, and I don't know, I think it's really well suited for Yume Nikki. It is different, but you can't really expect a one-to-one translation when the original game is 2D pixel art. Also, it's not just anyone drawing this. The manga was illustrated by Tomizawa Hitoshi, mostly known for his work on Alien 9, which I highly recommend by the way. There's nothing you can do to stop me from inserting my extremely niche interest in my videos. You signed up for this. On a similar note, the manga was written by Machi Gerita. For half of you, that's probably not gonna ring any bells, but I see you Vocaloid fans. I know you're hiding that Matryoshka jacket and those magnet headphones in your closet. We all have our secrets. Another piece of the game's history that is rather hit or miss for fans is 2018's Dream Diary. When game publisher Playism acquired the distribution rights to Yume Nikki, they didn't just release it on Steam for no reason. They would also announce for a series of countdowns that a new Yume Nikki project would see release in the upcoming months. According to Playism, this new project would be supervised closely by Kikiyama, and after 14 years of not even knowing if they were still alive, it's safe to say the announcement was met with a lot of hype. But you probably know how these things usually go, huh? Upon release, Yume Nikki Dream Diary was met with mixed reception. The game's model shifted from freeform exploration to a more linear level design similar to Limbo. It was definitely not what people expected, but hey, I'm not here to beat on a dead horse. I generally believe that both the manga and Dream Diary deserve their place alongside the original Yume Nikki. The respective releases serve to bring back attention to a game that many of us consider part of our core identity now. To me, that's something worth praising, whether you enjoy the end result or not. And it's not like these are the only two pieces of media adjacent to Yume Nikki. Part of why it's still remembered to this day has to be attributed to the sheer amount of fan content stemming from it. Over the years, so many people were inspired by the game to pick up a pencil, a brush, or even game development. And with that amount of creativity came in a ton of fan games, most of which are memorable for their own unique reasons. There's no sense in trying to make an exhaustive list of every fan game, there's just way too many. But I think it's important to at least highlight some of my favorites. Created by Japanese developer LOL, .Flow is probably one of the earliest and most iconic fan games. In it, you play as Sabitsuki, a white-haired girl forced to confront her dark past in the form of nightmarish dream worlds. It was originally advertised to me as an edgier, grimdark version of Yume Nikki, and I feel that's probably a disservice to the experience. While .Flow does feature a lot more body horror, it also took the opportunity to iterate on the game's formula, offering players extremely different locales and even multiple endings. An interesting gameplay element it brought is the rust. In-game, there are multiple forbidden areas that you can only access once all effects have been collected and dropped off in Sabitsuki's PC. This allows Sabitsuki to turn into a rusted version of herself, effectively unlocking all of these blocked off areas, as well as the game's true ending. The next one could easily be seen as the complete opposite of .Flow. Answered Prayers by Clofear focuses a lot more on religion and supernatural beings rather than scares. And it's probably because of it that it's one of the more well-known English fan games. It's definitely smaller in scale, but it brings its own spin to the genre. Instead of exploring dreams, Fluorette goes to spirit worlds. They also collect prayers instead of effects. According to the official website, Answered Prayers has been put on hiatus since 2013, but you can still find its creator on Twitter where they're actively working on their own webcomic. But if there's one fan game that means the most to me, it has to be Yume Tuki. I know it's technically pronounced Yume Nikki since 2 is ni in Japanese and it's kind of a pun, but this pronunciation helps to make things less confusing for me. Similarly to its source material, Yume Tuki has no overarching plot. You play as a girl named Urotsuki as she explores several dream worlds and collect a large amount of effects. What separates this game from the rest though is the circumstances around its creation. Yume Tuki was the collaborative effort of a large group of fans from 2chan. Plenty of people who collaborated on this project were notable for having worked on other fan games. And while this game and its many dream worlds might not be as cohesive as other fan projects, since it's being worked on by so many people, Yume Tuki serves as a perfect celebration of all that is Yume Nikki. And there's so many more, Yume Nishi, The Looking Glass, Flesh Child, I could go on all day. There's just something amazing in how a game made by a single person managed to influence so many people, and it extends way beyond fan game territory. A lot of game developers have come forward to credit Yume Nikki as a source of inspiration, whether that's reflected in their project's gameplay or even the way they approach storytelling. Games like Omori, Anodyne, Lisa, plenty of which are now considered cult classics, wouldn't exist if it weren't for a small game that just so happened to push its medium one step forward. In turn, those games are already inspiring another generation of artists, and they too will hopefully push the boundaries of their own medium someday. Even though Kikiyama's work inspired others to perfect its formula, to create art that elevated, if not surpassed it, there's still nothing quite like it. Finding the exact words to describe how much Yume Nikki meant to an entire generation, let alone myself, is as hard as describing the game itself. There is no right or wrong answer, it's all up to your own interpretation, your own experiences. Though, to me, Yume Nikki meant the world. It arrived at what seemed like the perfect time in my life, and it's only now that I'm older that I realize how much it all meant to me. The hours I spent in front of my computer, talking to other people, assembling what seemed like an infinite amount of puzzle pieces together in hopes of finding some semblance of meaning. Yume Nikki felt like a rite of passage into my teenage years. It was a game that made me realize I wasn't alone to feel this way. And even though years have gone by and I'm no longer in touch with most of these peoples, I'll never forget them, or the memories I have. I can't forever live in the shadow of my own nostalgia. I know I'll never be 10 again, spending all night doodling Madatsuki or Uboa in my sketchbook. But at least, I can make something to honor all those memories.